Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. This is Dr. Deschavo, and we're moving into a super fun chapter about reproductive function. So I just find this so interesting. It's pretty cool. So we're going to go over a pretty good introduction of reproductive anatomy and physiology, and then we'll move into disease processes. As always, if you have any questions, you know where to find me. So, reproductive anatomy, we're going to go through male first and then female. I like to do the pictures and then we're going to go through all the structures and their functions. So please just watch and listen while I go through these pictures, and you can go through as we make the lists in the written PowerPoints as to the function of these structures. So let's start here. This is a sagittal section of a male. So it's almost like we've turned him to the side and unfortunately cut him right in half, and we're looking at the inside of his reproductive organs. So in the scrotal sac, we have the testicles, which we're going to talk about this small section here blown up. Okay, so if we look at this blown up, inside of the testicles, at this section, we have what are called the seminiferous tubules. And you could see there are thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of tubules. And these tubules all create the sperm, okay? All create the sperm. And the sperm then move into the epididymis. And the epididymis looks like a little comma shape that sits on top of the testicles, or actually it's on top of the seminiferous tubules, I would say, because this is all part of the testicles. Now, in the epididymis, this is where sperm mature. This is where a male will ejaculate sperm from. So if he doesn't ejaculate, the sperm stay in here and they'll actually be reabsorbed and broken down. If he does ejaculate, it starts to move into the vas deferens. And the vas deferens is the tube through which sperm will pass to be sent out the penis when a man ejaculates. Okay, so those are the basic structures of the testicles. Very general introduction. There is more. We're not going to get into a lot of the other specifics. Okay, now we have the spermatic cord that'll lead down to the testicles. This is where the vas or the ductus deferens passes through, but we also have blood vessels and nerves because we need to be able to control as well as send nutrients and waste to and from the testicles. There's a little bit of a connective tissue sheath through which all those structures pass. Okay. Now, those structures, actually, let's just follow the vas deferens. The vas deferens then actually comes out. Watch this crazy circuitous little direction it takes. It goes in front of the pubic bone. Is that crazy? And then it goes up and over the bladder to behind the bladder. Okay. At that point, there's a little sac called the seminal vesicle. The seminal vesicle helps to secrete the fluid and substances that'll be in ejaculate. So the sperm come from the seminiferous tubules and the epididymis. The seminal vesicle, which is behind the bladder, helps to create the ejaculate in which sperm will travel. Okay, there's a little tube then, it's hard to see, but this little tube goes through the prostate and actually will meet up with the prostatic urethra. This is one of the times I actually want this to expand. You can see that tube right there. Okay, so if we, let me see if it'll let me, it won't. Okay, so that tube goes in the back part of the prostate and joins up with the prostatic urethra. The prostate also helps to contribute fluid and substances to the ejaculate. And then the ejaculate will go through, and I actually have a closer picture than this. Let me see if I can enlarge this. Aha, I think I actually got this figured out. Okay, so if you look at that, If you can follow the vas deferens up and over the bladder, it'll pass through that seminal vesicle, get more fluid and substances for the ejaculate, and then it'll meet in with the prostatic urethra. It'll continue down through the lower part of the penis here. And then the ejaculate comes out the urethral meatus or opening. Okay? I call it the loop-de-loop, right? Because it goes up over the bladder, back in the back, sorry, that was a little messy, back in the back of the prostate, and then it goes through the urethra of the male. Okay? Now, while we're looking, I think it's good to remember that vas deferens goes up and over the pubic bone, because they can actually, if they have any inflammation, feel that there. That freaks them out, but they can. All right? And this is also a good picture to show how, if we were to do a rectal exam, how close we are to that prostate if it were to get enlarged. Right here is a Cowper's gland. This Cowper's gland is what secretes pre-ejaculate. It goes right into the urethral, actually what's called the spongy part of the urethra. Okay? And it releases a lubricant that helps to clean out the urethra before a man ejaculates. It changes the pH so it's more prone to let the sperm get through without any issues. There's different parts or tissues in the penis. The bottom is the corpus spongiosum. The spelling is in the notes. We'll get to it. And the top is corpus cavernosa. Okay? And the reason I point out those different parts is because the top part, or the cavernosa, is what fills up with blood when a man gets an erection. The spongiosum, or that bottom part, doesn't fill up with as much blood, which is brilliant, because if it did, it would close off the urethra and a man couldn't ejaculate. Okay? This is the glans penis, where the foreskin would be if there's a foreskin, and it's slightly enlarged. And this is the meatus or orifice, depending on how you learned it. Okay? Here's where the seminiferous tubules are. Just to review really quick, here's the epididymis, which goes into that vas deferens and back and around. All right, I am going to make this picture smaller, hopefully, so we can look at the other anatomical structures. So looking from the back, you can see the seminiferous tubules in the testes, the epididymis as it sits on top of the testes. That leads to the vas deferens and into the back of the bladder, where we have the seminal vesicles that secrete the fluid that helps to contribute towards the ejaculate. Those both go into the back part of the prostate to get more fluid for the ejaculate, which then will go through the spongy urethra, which is the part that's actually in the penis. All right, let's move on to the next picture, which will show you those tissue differences in the penis itself. So just to give you a little reference, here's the bladder with the prostate. It's almost like they've taken the tissues out and laid them down. Here is the prostatic urethra. Here is what is called the membranous urethra. I'm not seeing that listed anywhere, but you don't need to know membranous urethra, but I do want you to know prostatic urethra is the part of the urethra that goes through the prostate. Spongy urethra is the part that goes through the corpus spongiosum of the penis. Okay, so if we were to, sorry guys, but cut the penis and look at it, Here's the bottom, which is the corpus spongiosum through which the urethra passes. The part of the penis that has most of the blood vessels is the corpus cavernosa. Not that the spongiosum doesn't have some blood vessels in it, but the cavernosa, which are these two chambers at the top, have a lot of blood vessels, so we can allow the penis to erect when a male gets stimulated. And these will be the areas that fill with blood with an erection. Here's your external urethral orifice, or meatus. I say meatus because that's how a lot of us learned it. They, of course, always change names. So let's go into some of those definitions. So male reproductive system. I've shown you the picture. We're going to talk about some of these things. So this generates and transports sperm, but it also produces sex hormones, primarily testosterone. Don't forget that all males and all females have the main sex hormones, which are testosterone, progesterone, and estrogen. In the males, it'll be predominantly testosterone. The male reproductive system also aids in urination because that's where the urethra passes. We talked about the penis, the scrotum, which will be the sac around the testes, which helps to lower or descend it. We'll talk about that in a little bit. The testes themselves, the ductal system, and the accessory glands that create semen or contribute to semen. So, penis is part of that external genitalia, which contains that erectile tissue, which will be in the corpus cavernosa. Just make note of that. The corpus spongiosum, make note of this, is where the spongy urethra is. The whole reason for reproductive system in the male is to deposit sperm in the female reproductive system when we're totally talking from a biological function. Okay? Average length when flaccid and erect. I don't care if you know those numbers, but your book put it in. The scrotum is going to be the sac around the testes and epididymis in the lower spermatic cord. It is there to maintain temperature. Okay, so it draws closer when it is cold. It lowers down when it is warm because we have a very small temperature range that sperm is viable. It's only, I think, a 3-degree difference. So if there is a huge change in temperature, we can kill off or decrease the amount of sperm. All right, so the penis has the urethra and the corpus spongiosum, corpus cavernosa, prostate, 2 of the above. What do you think? All right, moving on. Testes produce sperm and the sex hormones. Spermatogenesis, genesis in anatomical and physiological functioning, always references the creation of something. Spermatogenesis is the creation of sperm. It is a several-step process. We're just going to talk about it in general. So the creation of sperm in most males begins about 16. Those seminiferous tubules produce the sperm. They are then sent to the epididymis for them to mature until a man ejaculates. If he does not ejaculate, they're just reabsorbed. Testosterone gives males those secondary sexual characteristics. It regulates their metabolism and their protein anabolism, which is the building up of tissues. Because males have more testosterone, they tend to be bigger and stronger. Testosterone gives them more of a chance to build up protein structures, which includes bones and muscles. So that ductal system is going to deliver sperm from the testes out the male urethra into the female reproductive system. It includes the epididymis, which we spoke about, the vas deferens, the spermatic cord, the ejaculatory duct, which is that little bit in the back of the prostate where it joins up with the urethra. Okay. Semen is going to include sperm from the testes, from the seminiferous tubules to be exact, and ejaculatory fluid from the seminal vesicles and the prostate. Those two glands, the seminal vesicle and the prostate, will add to the ejaculatory fluid itself, but also fructose for energy, and also substances which will balance the pH in the female reproductive tract so the sperm can live and get to the egg. There's other substances as well, but just to give you an idea. So question time. Males begin to produce sperm by 10 years old. True or false? All right, moving on to the general anatomical introduction for female reproductive system. So the function is the generation of eggs, which is called oogenesis. Ovulation is a transport of those eggs through the tubes and into the uterus. If a woman were to get impregnated, that would happen in the fallopian tubes. The egg and the sperm would have to meet in the fallopian tubes, which is the uterine tubes as well. We're going to look at all those in just a minute. And then if they were to get pregnant, it would travel into the uterus where it would be implanted. Okay? And then gestation would be that fetal development. It's fascinating to me. Oh my goodness, fetal development. Parturition is delivery of the fetus. If a woman were to get pregnant, which we'll talk about some of those steps as well, and lactation is milk production. So the female reproductive system is put in a place to produce all of these steps. We are going to look at the ovaries, the fallopian tubes, the uterus, the vagina, external genitalia, and the mammary glands, all those anatomical structures. So this is a midline section of a female and her anatomical structures. We're going to look at it from the front as well. Starting from the bottom, we have the labia, which are the lips. There are majora and minora. Majora are the ones with the hair. Minora are the hairless lips. If we move up, well, let's just get bladder and urethra out of the way because they are not part of the reproductive system for a female. But I do want to point out some things. So the urethra will lead up to the bladder. We have the bladder here. And I mentioned previously in the urinary system about the female's uterus. Here's our uterus right here, expanding. And you can see it's about fist size in a non-pregnant female. In a female who is pregnant, when it becomes fully pregnant, goes all the way up, I'm going off the screen, to the bottom of the rib cage. So this uterus expands greatly. Well, not only does it go up, guys, it pushes down on the bladder. And this is why we get that stress incontinence with females. Okay, so the vaginal opening tilts back. The cervix is the tip of the uterus. And then we'll have the os, which they are calling the cervical canal. It's fine. We'll call it the cervical canal, which is the opening into the inside of the uterus itself. Okay, and there's different layers to the uterus, which we'll talk about in the future. Okay, the uterus is usually tilted forward. In some females, it may point up. It may actually point back. Okay, but in the normal presentation, it tilts forward. Now, the uterus is surrounded by the ovaries, the fimbriae, which are these finger-like projections, and then the fallopian or the uterine tube, which comes around, and we're going to look at it in a better picture and goes into that uterus. Okay. Just as a little sidebar, the rectum is just behind the uterus. Okay. And then we have the pubic bone, and the clitoris is the part of the female reproductive system which can get stimulated during sex. I won't talk about it much because I'm looking more at the baby aspect, okay? But just as a sidebar. Now let's look at the uterus from the anterior view because I think it's a little bit easier to see. There's a couple of things that I want to note in here. So in order to hold that uterus in that tilted forward position, we have a really big, thick ligament called the broad ligament. And this broad ligament is a serosine membrane which envelops the uterus and the fallopian tubes and the ovaries, and it helps to hold the uterus in that front tilted position. there is another ligament called the round ligament. This ligament's pretty cool. This round ligament will come all the way down into the labia, okay? And that round ligament also helps to hold the uterus forward. When we look at the ovaries, usually there are two. They're held in place by this uterine or this ovarian ligament, and they will release an egg. And there are fimbria, which are finger-like projections, which will draw those eggs or oocytes into the fallopian tube, also known as uterine tube. Hopefully, sperm will meet the oocyte in that fallopian tube. If they do, they're pregnant. Travels down the fallopian tube and hopefully implants in the upper part of the uterus, where it will grow and mature as a baby. Okay, so I got a little off track there. Told you I got excited about babies. All right, so the layers of the uterus are the endo, meaning inside, like endoscopy, endometrium. Myo means muscle. Myometrium is the muscular layer of the uterus. Perimetrium are serous membranes that are on the outside of the uterus. The cervix is the bottom part of the uterus where it narrows. That is known as the os. I think they called it the canal. I won't ask you that. Okay. And then we have the tip right here that actually invaginates, which actually means dips into the vagina. Over here, I could go on about this forever. Okay, we have an egg cell. I call it an oocyte. O-O-C-Y-T-E. I think it's a more proper anatomical term. Sorry, got to do it. Okay. It is also known as a follicle. I'm going to have you just cross that off for now because it's opening up another bag of worms. All right, that's a good introduction into those anatomical structures. What I would like to do now is look at the anatomy of an ovary. All right, so this is one of our ovaries that has been cut in half, and we're looking at the inside of it. And what happens is we have several eggs or oocytes that are immature, hundreds of them, and women are born with hundreds of immature eggs that exist on the outside of these ovaries. And that is called the cortex of the ovary. And these oocytes start very, very basic. They start as what's called a primordial follicle. You know, this doesn't have it. You know what? I'll get into this in the future. Let me give you just the general gist. I'll write the steps out for you in the notes because I think this could get a little confusing. So let me give you the general gist here. So we're born with hundreds of these oocytes out in the cortex of the ovary. And in the medulla of the ovary, we actually have its blood supply that can keep our ovaries nice and healthy. So one of these very immature oocytes or eggs will start to develop. And as it develops, it doesn't move around the outside of the cortex. I just want to clarify this. They always do this to show how it develops. Okay, so you could see it starts to get more cells around it, and this is actually the oocyte right here. And it'll develop to the point where it's got a whole bunch of fluid around it. And when it gets to that point where there's fluid around it, it's ready to be ovulated. It'll be ovulated out of the ovary. We've got the fimbriae of the fallopian tubes waiting for it, and those fimbriae will urge it into the fallopian tube to make its travel down into the fallopian tube. Okay? And what is left is a little sac. And this eventually will turn into scar tissue. This is what these pictures as they progress to the left show. But I want to point out this sac, guys, because this sac, just make a mental note of it, if we get pregnant, this sac will secrete progesterone. And progesterone, we know, progestation, is going to be one of the hormones that will help us to keep and nourish our babies if we get pregnant. Okay, so just make a side note of that. So this shows the progression and the maturation from a very immature oocyte to an ovulated oocyte. And just make a mental note that the scar tissue that is left can release the hormones that will help to perpetuate a woman's pregnancy. And that, I think, is a really good start into the anatomy. I do have some more questions that I'm going to go over. Just a second, actually. Yeah, we'll go over it in the next video. I was just looking ahead a little bit. Thank you so much. Let me know if you have any questions, and I will see you in the next video.